So we're going to switch to something, we've been saying for years that all companies need to think like software companies. So today we're fortunate to have Ada here. It's going to help us think through what it's like to be at Microsoft. And as I started preparing for this talk, one of the things that really struck me, we talk a lot about Google and Amazon and whomever, right? And I was around for the first PC and had Microsoft Windows and Excel. I even remember that they hired got licensed from the Rolling Stones to play Start Me Up when they launched Windows 95. But we think about them as a productivity company, a personal productivity company, Excel, PowerPoint, what have you. It's a very different company today. And one of the things that I think struck me was how much your stock price has improved, what the market cap has done since Satya Nadella took over. My count is it's up 150%, bigger than most of the companies we spend a lot of time talking about. Tell us a little bit about sort of how Microsoft became this growth company, reinvented itself to become a growth company.
Sure. Before I get started, though, I just wanted to apologize for bringing the Seattle rain down to Southern California. I hope I get invited back to Southern California. But yeah, so when I joined Microsoft 2 years ago, 2016, the company was already beginning to make its transformation from primarily selling boxed product to cloud-based services. And I think a big part of what allowed us to do that is not only making a big strategic shift, but also a cultural transformation. So I think a big part of that is this notion called the growth mindset, which is at the core of our transformation that we're doing today. As you know, Satya is an incredibly curious individual. He asks a lot of questions. He encourages us to do that. And I think he's really weaved that sort of mindset into the fabric of the culture for the company. And so what that's done is changed our culture from being a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. And I think you had mentioned before that the pace of digital transformation is dizzying, and that's absolutely true. I think it's changed the way we've looked at things in terms of creating products, telling customers what they want and why they want it, and changing that conversation into more of a learning and listening conversation where we're asking customers what do they want and what do they need. Instead of spending all of this time making products, launching them, and then realizing that the marketplace has passed us. So it's been a big part of what's helped drive a lot of the growth. I think that cultural change has helped us.
So before we get in, I want to push back on that a lot. Not push back, I want to sort of push on that because I think that's really important. And I love your phrasing of what's going on at Microsoft. But just so we understand, because everybody interacts with Microsoft in our own way. Some people love gaming, some people use just PowerPoint and Word and Excel.
Sure.
Others are doing, if you're a CIO, you care about sort of some of your platform services. Just give us an overview of all the sort of the major business units that Microsoft is in today.
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting too, because part of what's helping us along this digital transformation is changing the way we think about opportunity as it goes forward. So rather than looking at standalone products and business lines, Satya's actually reorganized the company into major solution areas. So today we've organized the company by 5 key solution areas. The first one being the modern workplace, so a lot of what you're familiar with in terms of productivity tools like Office 365, collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams, so really helping employees become productive and more efficient in getting things done. The second area is business applications. So really that's taking things like, for example, Dynamics 365, which takes a lot of disparate data sets and actually makes the connections to help provide business intelligence and insights to help companies and employees be smarter. And there's also applications and infrastructure. This is where our Azure cloud business sits. And as we know that the cloud computing is really at the center of what's driving a lot of digital transformation today. So it's probably no surprise that it's a big growth driver for the company. And then data and AI. You talked a lot about data and that being at sort of the core asset for many companies. And so, Microsoft is creating, AI technology and solutions that will help provide sort of that predictive information to help companies become smarter, faster. And then finally, gaming. That's where my personal passion area is and where I have the deepest knowledge. I've been in the industry for a very long time. And even gaming has changed over the past several years. There are 2 billion gamers in the world today in an industry that is between hardware, software, and services, $125 billion annually. And it's changed. It's no longer just games for hardcore gamers. There's actually a broad community of gamers. There's actually hundreds and hundreds of millions of people who watch people play games, as you're very familiar with streaming, Twitch, and actually that number is actually in the next few years going to actually exceed. So the people who are watching games are going to actually exceed the number of people who actually play games.
So Taylor Swift has a lot to worry about.
Yeah, it's very popular. And with the rise of esports, everything.
We actually have one of the biggest esports arenas in the country right here in UCI, and we actually have a major in gaming. It's sort of always astonishing when I hear sort of the statistics around gaming.
Yeah, very true.
So it's sort of interesting when you talked about the divisions, because you reflected a lot sort of on what Susan was saying, because you're not looking at sort of the vertical silos, if I may use that word, that you used to have before. You're really sort of putting yourself in the customer's shoes and saying, what do they need to see as a solution for their problems rather than selling them a product?
Yep.
How did you at Microsoft break down those sort of, I mean, it may have been before your time, but I'm curious to sort of hear.
No, I think, well, it started before I joined the company, but it's actually what Susan said really resonated with me about how we are starting to break down those silos. So part of it was really, having the customer at the center and looking at what's best for the customers and then aligning the different sort of business areas around sort of towards that same goal. The other thing is just organizationally, we had to break down some of those silos. And so in my area in business development, we used to have business development live within each of the individual business units, and that was great. It allowed people to be very nimble and really focus on their business, but what it didn't do was allow us to look macro across the company and bring that to the table to a particular customer or partner. So today, business development in my group rolls up into a woman named Peggy Johnson, who runs business development for all of Microsoft. Even though I spend more than 90% of my time with the gaming division in the company, we roll up into a central organization, so we're able to look across.
Yeah, two things that you've touched on there that we find in our research as well. One is digital transformation is comprehensive, and it's sort of really sort of having a customer in focus. And so the nature of the of the transformation is truly comprehensive, and then sort of the speed of change and the culture has to change, which I think all of which you're touching. Let's go back to where we started, which is your conversation about we can't be a know-it-all culture, and we must really think about learning. Sort of that plays off with some of the messaging we've been trying to get out based on our research around. We're really competing on know-how and ideas, and so tell us a little bit about sort of what that means on a day-to-day basis and how you focus on learning rather than assuming sort of that you already know the answer.
Yeah, well, I think things are changing so quickly, even in the games industry in particular, where I see that both internally, where we actually are looking at new business models. So, I mean, a lot of you are familiar with the software as a services, but we really have transformed the games business from a boxed product, $60, game, pack it and ship it, to actually games as a service today.
Right.
And so that's fundamentally changed how we actually have to design games, release games, keep them updated so we can actually keep players engaged. We know from the industry that we're shifting a lot of the businesses going from retail physical box product to digitally purchased product, and actually what we call post-sale monetization in the games.
So let's talk about that, because I think that is one of the hardest transformations, at least from my experience within companies, it's very easy to bandy the words around, well, we went from product to software as a service, right?
Yep.
But it completely changes how you, to your point, how you design and build the game. And it doesn't have to be a game, it could be any product. So even if you look at cars, for example, one of the things that we used to talk about a few years ago, which everybody takes for granted right now, is Tesla was the only car that improved after you bought it versus every other car that depreciates when you buy it. But that change of, what does that do to the thinking within Microsoft or more broadly? Like, how do you sort of wrap your head around I need to release games more frequently. I need to release on a bi-weekly schedule. I can release something that's not necessarily the best game I know how to build, but get it out there first.
Right, so we've actually had to change a lot of programs to actually be able to do that, because it used to have to be perfect before we shipped it,
Right.
and there was no opportunity to update it. So now we've created programs like Game Previewer, where you can actually launch games before they're actually finished and actually get player feedback, and that will help improve the game. And so it's driven a lot by data and making sense of that data, and then figuring out what to actually create and launch as a result of that.
So it's beta for games.
Beta for games, yes.
And one of the things that I find really interesting, which one of my colleagues does research on this, is I don't know, for example, if there's a vending machine for soda in a game, it can be Pepsi one day and Coke the next day,
Yes.
based on sort of your commitment. So it's sort of that, so your in-game purchases are a big piece of your revenue stream.
And it's increasing. It's increasing, which is why often now you're seeing free-to-play games, and you're wondering, well, how do you really make money off of free-to-play games? But it's amazing how, small purchases, 99 cents, $2, that can really add up. And people, over time, spend an incredible amount of money inside a game.
Well, if you think about Facebook, most of us actually don't buy anything on Facebook, and they just monetize
Absolutely.
the data itself, right? So,
Yes.
so these 99 cents,
They add up.
who's exactly? Very soon, it's a lot of money. What did you actually do at Microsoft to embrace this learning culture? So, you've been there for 20 years. People's stock options hadn't moved much. And all of a sudden it's like Satya comes in and says, we really need to change the way we do business.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What I found in joining the company is there's been people who have been at the company for a very, very long time. Some people, at least in our group, have been there since the launch of the first Xbox in 2001, and so been there a long time. And then there are also a lot of new people in the
Right.
business as well. And so what I've found is that people have generally have found Satya's approach really refreshing, even if they've been there for a very long time. But I think the other element is that we're actually hiring a lot of external people and bringing in fresh ideas and having sort of a diverse group of people now sort of at the table, sort of making decisions and having conversations, and actually helping us develop this new muscle around making games differently.
So you were one of the people who was attracted to Microsoft
Yes.
by sort of the growth mindset and its emphasis on diversity and inclusion. So why did you decide to join Microsoft?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. During my interview process, I did speak to other senior female executives in the company, and I thought that was a reflection of what I really felt was important, and to have senior female leadership in the company and sort of their experiences in the company. That was really important to me. But just also the fact that they were interested in bringing outside opinions and being more open to doing things differently, or at least questioning why we're doing things a certain way. And I think that was, by design and by intention, to bring people like me into the company. And so I see that reflected in a lot of our internal meetings and sort of shaking things up. And I think that's helping us.
So gaming is, and I may be wrong here, but is widely seen as a male sport. So how does diversity and inclusion pay off? And there's so much backlash now about tech bros and whatever else the term of the day is. Talk to the audience about sort of how does diversity and inclusion pay off, in terms of products, in terms of sort of building a business, the culture. Obviously, we welcome and I will point to the audience and say, we actually work on this, making sure that we are adequately represented with sort of diversity on the stage, because a lot of tech conferences actually don't do that. So it's important to us. But how does it pay off at Microsoft?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting looking at the statistics, because of all the gamers, we know that over 40% of gamers are actually female, but we're underrepresented in the industry. So there are about just over 20% of the industry are women today, and so working actively to change that. I think because we want ourselves to represent sort of the diversity of our gamers. We know that there are different kinds of gamers. We know that, we'll continue to have, actions and first-person shooters and role-playing games that appeal to certain gamers, but we know that our platform and games appeal to a very broad audience. So having a diverse set of people make decisions about what games we bring to our platform and what kind of investments we make into the types of games that we launch is really important, because we hear from those communities who tend to say that they're underrepresented and not find those games. So even if they're not huge commercial successes, we know that there are certain games that really appeal to everyone who's playing.
And you see this with diversity in Hollywood and a variety of other places too. But other games that you can point to where sort of people of diversity actually played a role, that these are different than Microsoft would have built on it without sort of this?
Yeah, so we actually have a program called ID at Xbox, which is our independent developer program, where we actually encourage small independent developers to bring sort of unique and innovative ideas and games to our platform. So just one example is a game called I Hope, which is targeted to people who have maybe cancer, and so it's about a little girl who has to protect her island from a sickness, and so we've heard from certain cancer patients that that's been really inspiring and helpful. So we really look at sort of games of all kinds to bring to our platform.
No, my response to that is just wow, because when I hear first-person shooter, I sort of have to sort of know what the right my expression is not very positive. Let me be as kind as I can.
In today's world.
Especially in today's world, right?
Yes.
As long as you're not making games on how to train teachers to carry.
No, we don't have that.
I couldn't resist. So one of the things you don't know about Ada, perhaps, is she actually worked at Lucasfilm. So it's sort of interesting, because all of us think about Star Wars and like what a cool place to work, and then you go to Microsoft and you can see why sort of Microsoft is actually just as interesting. But tell us a little bit about your experience at Lucasfilm and sort of how you led business strategy and partnerships there. One of the things we want to leave the audience with is sort of what are the sort of the generalizable principles that it's not just specific to Qantas, so Microsoft or whomever. There are things that are going on in the economy that all of us need to sort of adapt to and react to.
Yeah, so what I would say is that, having worked at an entertainment company, and I think this could be more generalized to a lot of content creators and companies that release content, but just to talk a little bit about the digital transformation that happened there that I think does have wider applications, is working from a traditional film or print time period and then transforming into the digital era where there's a lot more content that can be created at a faster rate, and which was really helpful across the business. So we had a lot more reference material we can use to create more products and games and ancillary products around it. But with all of this information, along the way we had to create ways of where do we store it and how do we store it? How do we create, how do we tag it in the taxonomies that we use around that? And then what is the security and the security around transferring that information and that data? So all of that was happening while we're basically creating product and creating content and releasing that into the world. And so those were real-time problems that we had to solve, on the fly with various tools along the way. But it allowed us to actually create more and create things faster.
I think one of the key phrases in sort of that rich comment was real-time. Mm-hmm. It reminded me as you were speaking of the Washington Post, which I spoke about, because I think that was the biggest shift that they had to make culturally, in one way anyway, which is it's a big difference between having a deadline of whatever time they went to print every night versus rolling out content all day long. Right. Because now you have to beat the Twitter feed and you have to beat sort of other rapid competitors, and they just didn't have the tools to be able to do that. The complete change in mindset. Was it like that at Lucasfilm too?
Very much so. I mean, you realized you had to hire people who had different skill sets and look at different tools. I mean, social media obviously is something that is really big. That you had to hire community managers and be able to respond in real time. And we used to joke about having, creating either Facebook or channels and Twitter handles, and then not having anyone be on the other end receiving that information, and that doesn't work. So it's a real-time pace, and we call it the sort of speed of production. It's very real-time and very sort of interactive with our customers. And I see that at Microsoft.
And you do find, because Martin was mentioning sort of his challenges with airline information, I've learned that if you actually tweet at them, they actually very often do respond. It's quite effective, especially if you have. There's a lot of academic research that shows that airlines actually or businesses respond to people with lots of followers. So I'm sort of ambivalent about giving you this advice. Spend more time on social media so that Qantas listens to you. But anyway, let me turn it open to the floor for questions. And over there, please identify yourself and your company.
Yeah, hi, Sam Kamel with a company called Inside. We do data tracking for passenger journeys in airports and airlines. But I'm an old softie. I was there years ago trying to build out the business development capability, and I'm glad to see how it's all come together. But one question I've got a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old. They love Minecraft, Overwatch, Fortnite, first shooter games.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about how Apple has had to respond to shareholders about the influence that all these digital technologies have on the youth of our world and how it's shaping them. And I would love to know, when I'm watching my kids shoot and kill and maim and do all these other things in this virtual world, is there a responsibility, is there a role to play for Minecraft and Blizzard and others to say, hey kids, time to take a time out. Remember, this is fun, but don't have this affect your brain and your psyche and your lack of social skills and stuff like that. Is there a role to play?
Yeah, no, it's a big question, and it is one that we tackle as an industry. So some of you may have seen recently that the heads of a lot of major gaming companies have recently been out to Washington, D.C. to talk about this very topic. And so it was interesting. I was actually just at a conference, the Game Developer Conference up in San Francisco a few days ago, and the head of the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, was talking about this particular trip that he took out to D.C. And it is a responsibility. I think we take it seriously in the industry, and everything from game ratings, it's from for the software to just being responsible about when we create the content, what goes into that content. So I mean, obviously, a lot of these shooters, if they're M-rated games, they're meant for older audiences. But yes, that age is where a lot of these games are very popular. So.
Other questions? Over here.
Hi, I'm Karen Jimenea from Allergan. I'm not a gamer. I'm not very familiar with gaming. However, one of the things that I kind of noticed is the rise of Pokemon, right? So when you look at Pokemon, it was very engaging. Anybody can do it. You go out, you get your steps. I think that kind of got people really into the game. And also, going back to his comment, it's something that you can play with your kids, right? You walk around and find these things. I didn't play it, but that's what they told me. But they always say, I'm going to go out because I need my steps. Do you see this, kind of transformation happening in the gaming community? Because when you think of gaming, you think about it like I'm in a room and I'm on my computer or, on the Xbox. But with the rise of these apps and Pokemon mobility, do you see a change in the gaming industry that would kind of encourage more movement, more physical activity around gaming?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with the rise of Pokemon Go, everyone really recognized how engaging that could be, and that's not just to a core set of gamers, but that family members could also play, that it sort of extended the community and audience for that game. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think the industry is looking at ways to be more engaging, not just being there sitting on the couch with a controller in your hand. So I think as you look forward and as technology sort of allows, there are going to be more ways to be more interactive. I mean, there's also, saw this way back with sort of the Wii, where there's a lot of sports games, and so there are ways that people are looking to make things more interactive, and especially as we look at games on the smaller devices, there's a lot more interactivity as well that can play out there.
You know, I want to close with something.
Yeah.
I'm just going to play off what Sam said because he asked the question about games. But I think one of the things that I'm detecting, and tell me if you agree with me, is sort of the companies that have been around longer. Because one of the things we're pushing very hard this year at the conference is responsible investment in digital technologies. And that means producers and consumers of technology. And we're seeing, I've heard your CEO speak about sort of responsible AI.
Yes.
And you see, without naming other names, sort of wide variability in sort of how companies are responding. And there's something that comes from having been around and taken having a few scars that changes how people approach this. What's Microsoft like when it's sort of its approach to, ethical AI or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really important. I think it starts at the top. It's very important to Satya. I see that in a lot of all the leaders of our businesses as well. I mean, I can speak to Phil Spencer, who's the head of gaming, and I can tell from just the way we look at doing businesses and partnerships that he is very ethical. There are certain games and things that, while they may appear on our platform, there are certain things that we don't necessarily partner or extend, or we're very intentional about what we do and how we market some of these games. And so, some of those decisions, I mean, they really start at the top, and it's really important to us.
And that's fantastic to see. Ada, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.